Goblins, goblins, goblins. Okay, goblins fans. So tonight we have something a little bit different for you. First, the battle report is for a 1250 point game instead of 2250. This was played back on Saturday, and we didn't start until after 11 o'clock, and we were both pretty tired at that point, so we decided to make it a little bit smaller point so we were able to get home and tuck ourselves into bed at a reasonable hour. That also, I think, allows us to have a little bit of a disclaimer that if we performed any rule tomfoolery in this game, hopefully it will be forgiven. And then the second thing is that I'm breaking battle reports up now into two different videos. The first is going to be a quicker, more narrative video, where I could throw in a little bit of narrative filigree in there, and I'm just going to go over what happened, who won, and some of those basics like that. And then the other video, which is this video, is going to be more of a deep dive. So the pictures that I took during the games, I sent them off to the Kings of War Institute for playing better. Got back a whole bunch of slides, and that is what we are going to be diving into right now. And we could see some of the moves that better players probably would have made, at least players better than me. So if that's what you're interested in, keep watching. If you are interested in just a quick battle report, I will put the link to it in the description below. All right, so let's dive right in. So here's deployment for our game. Once again, that is me at the bottom. Isn't it magical how that always happens? Or that's just how I take pictures. So Adam, I fed my hobbits after midnight, and now I have goblins. And then at the top is Mark, Baron von Neverwin's Basilea. And so a little bit about our table here. So we have 9 pieces of terrain. In green, we have 3 height 6 forests. In pink, we have 3 height 2 hills. And then yellow is a little bit of height 6 blocking terrain. In the bottom left, the purple is height 0 difficult terrain. And in the middle right there, circled in blue, is just a height 1 obstacle. And the scenario we were playing was Invade. So there's the center line with some beautiful art for you, made in Google Slides. Okay, so for our deployments. So down at the bottom, as a quick point, I had 11 drops and a unit score of 18 across all of them. And so highlighted in red are the Sneaky Stabber formation. I have 2 rabble regiments, a rabble horde, and a bigot. In orange are the heavier hitters for my army. In the front in orange is the Sharpstick horde, and they have a Brew of Strength artifact on them, and right behind them is a horde of trolls. Green is my speed contingent. On the left is a regiment of Fleabag Riders, and the little guy down at the bottom is a mounted Flaggett with the Diadem of Dragonkind. And then finally in yellow, the people who are going to be shooting stuff, my Spitter Horde, a Whiz with Bane Chant in addition to his basic Lightning Bolt, and then a War Trombone. Okay, and across the table for me, Mark brought with him the 2 formations that Basilea has. I'm not sure what they're called off the top of my head, but on the left in red, he has a horde of men-at-arms with spears and 2 regiments of men-at-arms with swords, and behind them is a priest, and together that formation allows the priest to be very inspiring, I think, to men-at-arms, and if any of those 3 regiments, or 2 regiments and horde are within 6 inches of the priest, they get Rally 2. Or the priest has Rally 2 for them, so it increases their nerve by 2. So on the right are 2 regiments of Paladin Knights and Naeus Lion Rider Man in green. So that's his fast stuff over there. For actual deployments for the scenario, I think Mark did a fine job with his deployment, putting his main contingent of men-at-arms in the middle makes a whole lot of sense, just because they have a clean path to march right down to the center line before they start running into any sort of terrain that'll slow them down. Of course, they had to keep them together for the formations, stuff. They need to be near that priest to gain the benefits of the formation. So that all makes sense the way that's set up, and I think it makes sense as well to put his fast stuff on one of the flanks, because this is pretty much a classic hammer and anvil formation here, with the knights and naos being the hammer and the men-at-arms being the anvil. If I had to nitpick, I might have done the opposite flank, just because where they're set up now, the forest is down at my side, where the battle's going to be with his fast people over there, and if he had set up on what's the left flank from this view, he would be able to pass the forest early on and then had some open ground, and then wouldn't have to worry about like losing Thunderous or anything like that. For my deployment, I hate it. I realized right after turn one, right as I was starting to move, that it was the wrong decision for me. So the reason why I deployed this way is really based on the fact that this is the first time I was taking sharp sticks. I knew they had phalanx, so I waited for Mark to deploy one of his knights, and he threw him over on the right flank. So then I put the sharp sticks where you see them now. And just as a quick point of reference, it's the same exact model I had been using for Grogger's Goons, but in this 1250 list, they are only sharp sticks. So I put it down there, and then I'm like, all right, well, he's going to have to, he won't be able to see me through the forest, and then he'll charge through the forest and be hindered, but then I have additional phalanx to get rid of the Thunderous Charge, because those knights have Thunderous Charge too. But I need to protect my flanks, so we stick the rabble on either side, and then I need the bigot nearby for inspiring, and then, because the sharp sticks are my heavy hitters, I want to keep them sort of with the trolls, so it's a nice 1-2 punch. So it all sort of centered right around those sharp sticks, and it was no good. And like I said, turn one, it's not that I knew I disliked my deployment. I even realized what I should have done right away, because I had moved those Fleabag Riders up to the left of that highlighted blocking terrain, and then all of a sudden it clicked, wait a second, I should have paid attention to that blocking terrain and what the scenario was and deployed differently. Okay, so this is how I would deploy. All right, so take a look at all the colors. The colors are all the same, right? So the red is my rabble. So on the left, I have 5 units, right? I have the sharp sticks in the front, the rabble horde behind them. The Fleabag Riders don't move, and behind them is the trolls, and then a regiment of rabble. And they are over on the left. And why is that better? Because directly in front of them, 6 inches onto my opponent's side is the first piece of difficult terrain. So they'd be able to at the double straight away. Where I deployed everything else, I have a forest, a hill blocking line of sight, a obstacle, and another forest, all within my side of the table that would slow me down. And being that I'm a weaker, pound for pound army, I need to be quick and get across, and the deployment was not going to allow me to do that. So I would have deployed like this. And you're probably going to say, well, Adam, of course, this deployment is going to be better when Mark doesn't get to redeploy anywhere. But I'd like to argue that I might have been able to do the deployment like this with his deployment staying exactly the way it is. And that's for 2 reasons. One, I had 11 drops to Mark's 7, and he was dropping first. So when I could deploy my 7th drop, that 7th, and then I had 4 more after it, 8, 9, 10, and 11, those could have been my 5 units all the way on my left flank. So I would have put them down there would have been nothing over there until Mark was all 100% done with his deployment. And so what I probably would have done was just drop the spitters down in the middle, maybe the Fleabag Rider on the right, and I would have started filling stuff in as you see them over there. And a lot of that stuff, to the right of the Fleabags are all my individuals and stuff, the war engine that's not scoring, right? Those are all the things that I can throw away, and they will have no effect whatsoever on actual scoring points, but I still want them to be useful. And so I've even um, will break your brain here. It breaks my own brain as I'm looking at it. But I projected maybe what the first couple of turns might look like if I had deployed something like this, right? So there's turn one. Everything's pretty much moving forward. The Fleabag Riders in outlining green on my left flank were able to go up the full 20 inches and start turning the corner by that, blocking terrain. Um, the Basilian army here is going to come down and start shifting to the left. They might have one or a couple of units turn and try and go directly left across the deployment zone, and that is a-okay with me. If they want to come and meet me up in that left corner, that's fine, because that's nowhere near the middle line you need to get over for invade. A second turn has me pushing forward a little bit more. The Fleabag Riders are now blocking off movement at the top of that, the blocking terrain there. And the rest of Mark's army might have come down and sort of run into my spitters and maybe one of my regiments of rabble, where I'm just sort of blocking off, and then I'm going to be able to harry them with the shooting units that I have on the right side, which was the whiz, the trombone, and the flaget with the diadem of dragonkind. And then finally, 3 turns in, I might have 3 of my hordes and 3 regiments up in that left corner, and that are either in scoring or just a pivot away from scoring. And so that's 9, and that's 15 points right there. And so I could even lose some of them, lose the spitters, lose a couple regiments of the Fleabag Riders and a couple regiments of the rabble. And even if I do all that, if I'm left with only my 3 hordes that are up in the left-hand corner, those 9 points, I just either need to kill a few things or just slow Mark down so he can't get over the middle line. The image looks absolutely crazy. I know that. But this was I think a fun little exercise to understand that deployment's a very important part of the game. If I had deployed like that and moved, things might have been a lot different than they end up being with me trying to march forward across that difficult terrain. All right. And so let's see how that actually pans out here. Turn 1 for me. The Fleabag Riders moved exactly the same way, because that's what gave me the idea. Like I told you, turn 1 like a light bulb. I realized, wow, I could block off that whole left side. So those Fleabag Riders are over there, marched everything. I couldn't go the full 10 inches forward because I ran into stuff. And I wanted to keep some sort of semblance of a battle line, because he's got those speed 8 knights and Naeus, which I believe is speed 9, over there and staring directly at me. Start doing a little bit of damage. Basilea has Iron Resolve, so even though I'm doing some damage, he's slowly healing some back. Basilea, they had no shooting in this list, so they move forward. You could see that 1 regiment of the men-at-arms turns to face my Fleabag Riders. Turn 2. I took the Fleabag Riders and I brought them back down. It was sort of like a fake, I guess. I thought maybe 1-on-1, even though the men-at-arms had a couple of wounds on them, I might not have won that battle. And so I decided, let me come back down with the Fleabag Riders and get a different charge. And it's important to note they do have the Potion of the Caterpillar on them, so they do have Pathfinder. So the fact that they're in that forest is fine. But now I have a few options for flank charges there. The Flaget, you could see, runs up that left-hand side, staying in the blind spots. And so both the Spitters and the Flaget are able to throw a bunch of shots over there. And then otherwise, things move forward. I feel like it's a recurring theme that I'm accidentally leaving some of my units that I don't have a whole lot of shooting, so the fact that I have a Bigot and the Whiz that have 3 shots each, and I could be putting a few points of damage on something, they're both blocked behind my my units. And I realize right now, as I'm looking at this, the fact that Naeus is probably height 2 and on a hill makes him height 4. I probably actually could have shot at him, and he would have had cover. Huh. Well, there we go. So that was something I missed. I have to remember the fact that you're on hill, you're taller, and taller units are taller than height 1 units. But even still, I probably would have wanted to continue targeting the same unit so that the Iron Resolve doesn't have as big of an effect. I would want to go after that right-hand regiment of men-at-arms, but I didn't. These red lines are just showing you that after this move, oh, and then also you can see I put a regiment of rabble right up in the face of his horde. Yeah, that's one of those moves that I'll blame on the fact that I was tired. So these red lines are showing what of my units I was leaving in charge range. And none of this was a surprise to me. Yes, that rabble horde could be triple charged with the knights coming in the flank. I put them there seeing if I could, I don't know, get myself some flank charges or something. So we'll see. And you can see I did a little bit more damage to those 2 units. The men-at-arms in the upper left-hand corner, I was able to get them up to a total of 10 wounds, I think, 9 or 10 wounds. So it would have been a 6 or a 7 to rout them because they were too far away from the priest to get the +2 to rallying, but I failed to do that. What if? All right, so here's the deep dive that I was talking about. So was my move with the Fleabag Riders the most optimal one? So I threw some lines out here so you can see what's going on. So the Fleabag Riders, the original intent, I knew he was going to turn a unit and come towards me. So I was like, all right, I'm going to throw him up there, and then I'm just going to, turn 2, I'm not going to attack. I'm just going to go around them. And then on turn 3, since I have a nice 20-inch range, I'm going to have, my pick of what rear charge I want. Unfortunately, because of the angle that I left the actual unit, you can see that yellow line, that I needed to go more than 10 inches. So being nimble, that would mean I would only have a single pivot. So I can only pivot once, and the fact that if I go straight, I would have clipped or at least come within an inch of the men-at-arms means that my pivot needed to be before I got there. So I need to pivot first and then move. And the green square in the upper left-hand corner is where I would end up when I hit the table edge. And it would have still been in view, and it would have been a rear charge, so I couldn't do that. And that's kind of the reason why I'm like, all right, well, I can't go that way. I need to turn around and go back. But was that the best choice? And so this is what I think I probably should have done, which is more or less finagled my unit. And again, you don't have all the time in the world to do this, so it would have to have been either quick measurements or eyeballing, but made it so that if he went at the double, straight in the direction that he was going, it would have given me a flank charge. And if he would have only moved his max of 5 and either stayed put or he'd probably rotate 90 degrees down towards me or some variation of it, that the place that I left the Fleabag Riders, I would have been able to just go in that direction that they're facing past his unit, at least an inch away, and then pivot the ones at the top and then go behind them and end where I finally was. So that, I think, ultimately would have been, the optimal move here. Sure, I'm losing another turn because I wouldn't have been able to move up until turn 3, and that means I could have charged on turn 4. So one turn slower than if I had positioned the Fleabag Riders in the right place after turn 1, but I think that would have been optimal. I would have had a rear charge because Fleabag Riders are, nothing to write home about. 14 attacks, only Thunderous 1. So a rear charge with them would have been very useful. But that's not what I did. And then the second thing, is, um, if you recall, I moved the rabble horde that's in the middle of those green squares. I moved them forward 4 inches or something like that, um, sort of presenting them as a charge target. Um, Ultimately, I don't think that was the right decision. Even though they are rabble, I don't have many other units. I think what I should have done is left them in place and only brought the rabble regiment up a little bit, encouraging him to only be able to charge with his horde, and then he'd be able to bring in his, knights only 8 inches because he'd have to pivot with them, and he'd be able to only bring in his regiment of men at arms only up to the um, that obstacle there. So if he came in and charged my rabble, the average amount of damage would have required him to roll a 7 to rout them. So it was a 50-50 shot of getting his unit there to definitely get a flank charge, or at least possibly just be a double charge where I could charge a horde instead and bring all of my two hordes to the left and out of the way of maybe the knights. I think that would have been the better choice, but that's ultimately what I ended up going with. If you guys think that there would have been a better move that I didn't think, leave it in a comment and let me know. I'm sure this is the peak of entertainment value to be watching this battle report, but also I'm doing this to try and really work on my tactics and get better. So I'm analyzing this stuff and I'm just, turning it into a video as well. So this is what Basilea did. Charged the rabble regiment, double charged the rabble horde, and Naeus went into the front of the sharpsticks. He brought his other regiment of knights into the forest so that now he is threatening the flank of my sharpsticks and the trolls and the rabble that are down there. The picture already gave away what happened, but got rid of the rabble. And I got really lucky with, I think, the rabble horde, because he ultimately did 14 damage to it, only needing a 7, so 50-50 shot to get that off the board, and I was lucky and he rolled underneath. And I also had the inspiration there, so maybe that helped, I'm not sure. But again, I think it's important to be able to do quick math in your head and not take a whole long time. So when I threw the rabble horde out there, I thought to myself, okay, the regiment of men-at-arms charging from the front is going to be hindered because of the obstacle that they end up just clipping, and then the knights being able to charge, they're going to be hindered. He's going to do what, like 7 or 8 damage max, right? So of course when I was making the slides, I did the math, and 14 was exactly the average. So that was just a bad move on my part, not a great roll on his. It was risky, and luckily, I'd like to say it paid off, because now I have the flank of the knights, but I still don't think it was the smartest move to make. Okay, but I still try and capitalize on it. So, Fleabag Riders, like I told you, I brought them back here. I do get the flank charge. The Rabble Horde pick up in turn to countercharge the excuse me, the Knights. I could get the flank of the Knights with the Spitters. I was able to Bane Chant the Sharpsticks. I was able to Bane Chant them as well. So now they're hitting on 5, 60 attacks, crushing 2. And then I just use that last Rabble regiment to sort of protect the flank of my Sharpsticks from his Knights. The Spitters are just shooting at the Horde, and I did that because, as you could see, I did another 2 damage to his regiment of men-at-arms up in that upper left-hand corner, and I was at a 11, I guess, 10 or 11, and I only needed a 6 again to rout him, and I rolled underneath it. So I got the 6. I'm like, all right, I'm going to save my Spitter shots, and I'm going to go after his horde. But no, I should have shot his regiment because I didn't get him off the table. Um, and then those two charges in the middle. Look what happened. I did 3 damage to the men at arms, and did nothing to them, and then 12 damage to the knights with the double attack, one of which was in a flank. So 85 attacks. I did 12 damage. I needed a 5 to rout, and I wavered him instead. Um, Again, following our theme here, were those bad attacks? Was I doing something wrong, or did I roll poorly? So the flea bags, everything average, I should have gotten 9 wounds, if my math is correct, not 3. So that one was just pretty underwhelming. They already had 1 wound on them, so it would have brought them up to 10. They were possibly within the 6 inches of the priest. He's right underneath the wounds that I threw up there for the horde, so it's hard to tell. So I would have needed either an 8 or a 6 or an 8 to get him off the table. Not a 7 like I wrote there. So it was still, I think, a good move on my part and just poor rolling. So that's unfortunate. And then the double charge was definitely just poor rolling because I should have, laws of probability said I should have gotten him off the table, needing to only roll a 5. But even still, my rolling was a little poor. I should have done 15 wounds, not 12, which would have left him in double ones territory. And another quick disclaimer: I'm not throwing this up to lament on, oh no, I've rolled poorly, but I just wanted to confirm to myself that what I thought were good attacks end up, were they actually good attacks, or was I calculating the numbers in my head on the fly incorrectly? So I think I was right both times with what I had this turn. It just didn't pan out for me, but that's okay. I got one more what if here for you. Troll edition. Look at those trolls. They're just sitting down there, right? That is where I left, or that's where they started at the start of my turn 3. Right? So this was at the end of Basilea 2. This is what they saw. And if you go back a turn, they didn't move. I didn't move them at all. So that is, I think, vastly underutilizing them. Another mistake that I made in this game. What could I have done differently? So there were 3 units in the charge arc that you could see there. 2 regiments of knights and then Naeus the lion tamer. But the first thing, as you see here, that maybe I could have done is I could have just repositioned, pivoted, and faced the left. Because I knew that I was leaving those 2 flanks potentially exposed if neither of those charges worked. Oh, look at that. This is from the after picture. But, the fact that there was a horde over there and another regiment and the knights were facing that direction, maybe that would have been a good idea. But what about the 3 charges? So option 1, seeing if I could double charge the knights, and you could see the green would be optimal placement, but based on where the trolls were located at the start of the turn, if I had rotated them and then tried to move in, I wouldn't have been able to actually catch the knight base. So that wouldn't have worked. What about if I had countercharged Naeus with my sharp sticks and then brought the trolls in to get the flank of the knights? And then, I would have been able to Bane chant the sharp sticks against Naeus. So just whether or not things could fit, the sharp sticks couldn't fit based on where the knights were placed. And I think that brings a rule question that you could say I could have there. I can't remember now if this is like a nudge rule or something like that, whether or not you could always countercharge, with the fact that that corner, I think, overlapped a couple of millimeters. Would that have been something that the Knights got bumped back for and was made valid? I don't know. It didn't fit, so it wasn't. And it didn't even come up in her game. I just saw that it wouldn't fit, so I didn't do it. Yeah, no good. And then finally, could I have double charged the Knights on the right with the rabble and the trolls? And the answer to that is no, just because I wouldn't have been able to fit into there. So I think, though, after I've run through everything that wouldn't have worked, this would have been the better option than standing still. Because it doesn't make sense to just have a unit, one, not go towards the scenario goal, which is get on to the other side, but then two, not help just destroying the other army. So I should have probably charged him into the front of those knights. One, just to completely disorder him, because he'd be hindered, sure, if he was doing the initial charge out of there and only losing one of his thunders, but one to, hitting on fours instead of threes. But I think one-on-one, I could have taken those knights if I charged first like that. Even though his countercharge would not have been hindered, he would have been disordered. But the monkey wrench thrown into my gears or whatnot here is that Naeus, instead of charging into the front of the sharp sticks for the second turn in a row, would probably take the flank of the trolls. But even if you do that math, both the trolls and Naeus, the Knights and Naeus attacking on averages would have left the trolls at a roll of 7 to waver or 10 to wound. So 50-50 shot of just wavering them. And if they weren't wavered, a second turn would have done 6 more damage to the Knights, and then only required a 7 to take them off the table. And at that point, the sharp sticks would have potentially gotten rid of the left regiment of Knights. The rabble would have turned around instead of facing off to the right to threaten the flank of the Knights and or Naeus, and I think I would have been in a much better position. But I didn't do that. Right, so that's one of my lessons learned. Don't not do things. And in response to the fact that I think I made some bad moves, this is the very smart moves that Mark made. The 2 exposed flanks that I had available, he took, and I can't remember if the rabble. Wait, we could just go back a tick here. Yeah, so it looks like it might have been a double front charge, hindered front charge with the Knights and Naeus into that rabble regiment on the right, but whatever it was more than enough to rout him. So I have lost 3 units, right? And now things are looking a little sparse for the Goblins. Mark's very excited about that. So turn 4, I don't have that much more to do. I'm still shooting at his regiment of men-at-arms in the upper left-hand corner, taking some pot shots at the horde, and so, boy, I can't go all the way back. So the Knights were wavered. They are headstrong. They did not succeed on their headstrong roll, so I still get the flank this turn with the sharp sticks. And then, for a second turn in a row, I do nothing with the trolls, and I just shoot at the Knights with my wizard and my trombone as if that would do a whole lot of damage, because it doesn't. I am able to get some stuff off the table, but look at my shooting this round. Goblin shooting, if it's not like a gun line, is not doing a ton of damage, especially when the spitters can see the horde, but they're behind the hill, so they've got cover, and at least the Knights get cover from the wizard's lightning bolt, so I did measly damage here. Here's another quick little mini what if. The trolls should have charged in. It was a turn too late, but they should have charged into the front of the Knights, and then my shooting should have gone after Naeus. That would have been better. Okay. Here's the end of turn 4. So I was able to get his Knights off. I reposition the sharp sticks to face to the right now, because that's the 2 units that could see him. Even though the back of him is to the men-at-arms and the men-at-arm horde, neither of them can actually see uh, any of my stuff. So what does he do? His slight overrun from the destroying the flea bags lets that horde be within 10 inches. Like it was like 9.8, and he charges the spitters. And then he just charges the knights into my sharp sticks, which is pretty inefficient for him because of my phalanx and the fact that he's hindered, and he takes Naeus into the front of the trolls. I would have possibly double charged something, but look at that, it did not matter. He only did 2 damage to the sharp sticks, which is maybe a little unexpected, maybe a little low, and 3 to the trolls, but not a lot of damage, but he wavered both of them. He rolled a 11 to waver the sharp sticks. They had a 9, so an 11 brought them up to a 20. They could have had a 12 to rout them, but they rolled an 11. And then the trolls needed a 11 to just waver them on 3, and that's when he decides just to roll the double 6s and wavers them and rubs it in. And then 9 damage to the spitters. They were left out on their own. That's no good whatsoever. Okay, so Goblin turn 5. I need to make something happen. But I can't because 2 of my 2 big heavy hitters are wavered this turn. There was no place for Dwarven Ale or anything in my list, so they do nothing. So I do a little bit of shooting. The spitters charge back into his horde. And really the only smart move I made, and if you bring out your magnifying glass, you might be able to tell, but the bigot decides to charge into the front of the men-at-arms. Put a speed bump or something in the way before they get that flank, a rear charge. So I was able, in my shooting, I only did 4 damage, so my shooting has not been that effective, but I was able to waver the knights. The odds of failing 2 headstrong rolls are pretty low, but I don't know. It's better than nothing, I guess. And I did 3 damage somehow with my spitter sitting on 6s. The theme of the night is, what move would have been better? Would it have been better had I just given the the spitters a halt, right? They clearly are not going to win that battle. And being as this is only turn 5, if I had done a halt instead, it would have just meant that the men-at-arms would not be countercharging, they'd just be doing a regular charge and they'd be hindered again. So they would just hit on 5s instead of 4s. Maybe if that was the case, my spitters could last 2 more attacks. Probably not, the fact that they're already on 9 wounds. But maybe. So maybe if I was really trying to min-max things, that might have been better for me on turn 5. And this is what the Baron does on his turn 5. It was a counter charge, so he was not hindered. He does another 9 damage to the spitters, bringing him up to 18. He only needed a 3 to rout them, and he does. He re-wavers my sharp sticks with, again, only 3 damage. They were up to a 12, so he needed a 9 to rout them, and wavered them. And then this is the play of the game by the bigot. I took 2 damage. He's a 9/11, so he would only have needed to roll a 9 to get him off the table and then overrun and do the rear charge and just destroy the sharp sticks. But he only wavers him. So hey, that's good. One of my goals, or not my goals, my takeaways from my previous games is to sometimes use my individuals to help block some charges or to do some things. And I feel like that was a good, it was a gamble for sure, but it was a good defensive move. The one maybe minor thing I would do differently is, like the spitters, I should not have actually charged with him. I think I would have been able to get him into the gap, stayed an inch away from the that regiment of men-at-arms and not charged, because if you could see, the men-at-arms is on the obstacle, and so it just would have meant maybe instead of 2 damage, he did 1 or 0 and not hindered him. Not wavered him because he was hindered. But again, beggars can't be choosers. I'm very happy with that waiver. And there was no turn 6. You could very much see that the game was over probably a turn or 2 ago. I'd like to argue that the game was over at deployment because I hated my deployment so much. And I have no one to blame but myself for that. But Basilea wins 8-0. He's got 3 points for his horde, 2 different regiments in there for another 4 points, and then his Naeus Lion Man for the 8th. I have no points, but I mean my spitter. No, I keep saying spitters. My sharpstick horde was, I don't know, 1/5 over the center line, so I was almost there. And that's the end of the game. Mark can't call himself Baron von Neverwins anymore because that was a very handed victory. Strong-handed? That's not a word. Well, it is a word, but it's not what I meant. A very good victory, strong victory. I think well played on his part. Played to the strengths of his army and just, disassembled my goblins piece by piece. I got a couple of takeaways from this game. Some good, some bad. So, let's start with some of the good stuff. So, top one on the list, that mounted flaget. He was actually kind of useful. 20-inch radius. I might have cheated once and shot his diadem weapon after moving the full 20 inches, which I don't believe I'm able to do. But I might have done that once accidentally. I was tired again, so forgive me, please. But the fact that he was able to move around, threaten areas, stay out of charge range, was pretty useful. In my 2250 list, I've changed it up a little since the last battle report, and I now have a mounted bigot in that list. He doesn't have any magic items, but my thought was using him as just a little bit of a fear factor, getting a unit in the rear of the army, but then also if there's any siege engines, he would still triple attacks on them. That would be 9 attacks sitting on 4s, so we'll be able to do, I don't know, 2-3 damage, maybe take out a siege engine, or siege, whatever they're called, war machine, war engine, if not, just disrupt them. So I like that. It was useful in this little game, and I think I'm happy about that change. I'm definitely going to keep it when I do a 2250 next. Point number 3, what I just recently mentioned also was that the move I did with the bigot, that block worked well. I spelled 2 wrong, so I was not tired when writing this. I just spelled it wrong. T-O-O, make it better. Like I said, I should not have charged there. I should have just put them there. So don't always charge. I got to remember that. Okay, I think those were the two good things. Okay, so what I need to do a little bit better, what I need to go back to the books and study on. I know I'm beating a dead horse, but deployment. The 2 important things that I did not do is 1, consider the terrain. Like I pointed out, the place that I deployed, I could not at the double going forward, even on turn 1. I ran right into difficult terrain and had to stop. I should have picked a place like that left flank where I could have moved quickly because that's what the scenario required. If it was a different scenario, the deployment that I did might have been fine. If I was trying to pick up some objective markers or something like that. But with Invade, that would have been important. Yeah, so that was the 2B there, which is consider strengths and weaknesses and how they play towards the scenario. Pound for pound, my regiment of rabble is going to lose to a regiment of men-at-arms with swords. In the open field, there's a good chance that my trolls are going to lose to the knights. So I should not have just placed my units directly across from his units and thought to myself, I'm going to march forward and beat on them with, you know, spears and giant rocks. That's not the goblins' strength. Their strength is numbers, and that would allow me to move your units towards the, whatever is going to score me victory points for a scenario. In this case, getting across the field and doing it unopposed. So I did not play towards that strength of goblins, and that was a problem. The few turns that I did the deep dive into what would have been a better move, the reason I was in the predicament is that I was not playing a turn ahead. The placement of the Fleabag Riders on turn 1, if I just pivoted them slightly different, and I'd thought to the fact that, yeah, he's going to turn the men-at-arms and move them 5 inches, and I just thought to myself, I know I can move 20 inches with one pivot. I need to be able to get around him. I wouldn't have run into, and wasted 2 of your minutes going into that. And same thing with the trolls. I put them there, and I didn't think about what I was going to do with them the next turn. And then they were just stuck behind my own units, and I couldn't do anything with them. If they had just been shifted to the left a few inches, so they were between my 2 regiments, if you took a mental picture of what the first optional charge that I said I could have done, I couldn't do it because I had to try and get into that slot at a weird angle. If the trolls were already just right there, they would have just needed to move forward, and they would have been able to slide in, and I would have taken those knights off for sure with a triple charge. And the trolls would have just been in a better position, not hiding behind my stuff and not useful. So I need to think ahead more when doing moves that aren't necessarily, game changers like charges. I need to plan charges in the future. Goblins were bred to be aggressive. Stop playing conservatively. That's just what I was talking about. Same goes for trolls. Don't sit back and, I think what I was doing on turn 2, I was sitting back and saying, I'm going to leave this terrain in front of me, the difficult terrain, so you're hindered, but, that didn't help me at all. It just made me get hit a little bit less on the first turn and then die. So I should have been a little bit more aggressive there. And then, yeah, keep exercising my brain calculator. I think it's important to time games, so you can't sit out and try and calculate exactly what dice rolls are going to be. But had I known that the average was 14 damage, to have that double charge on my Rebel Horde, I probably would not have done it. And the game could have gone a little bit differently. So I just need to be able to, and run those numbers better. And the only way to do that, I think, is experience, right? There's no real way to train that unless I'm going to be sitting at my desk while working and rolling dice or something. No, just play more, and it'll come. And then finally, this is a point specifically to my list. I think all the other ones are applicable in general, or maybe applicable to goblins. But for me, I think this list, I think this game helped point out the fact that I don't need the sneaky stabber formation. I've been using my rabble as chaff, so they can die often without attacking, at least the regiments do. And then even the horde, the fact that the sneaky stabber formation gives them vicious, they're only hitting on 5s. So 25 attacks hitting on 5s is only 7 or 8 actual hits on average. 7 or 8 hits. And so then when I'm rolling for damage, statistically only one of them is going to be a 1. So is it worth those 25 points to just re-roll the 1 die? I mean, the way I roll, certainly 1s come up a lot more often, but if we're just going on stats here alone, I don't think it's worth it. So, I have decided to change up my 2250 list to remove the sneaky stabby. I'm going to call them that. The sneaky stabby formation to get a little bit more versatility in the list. And I think that's it. So if you have been listening this whole time, I invite you maybe to leave a comment about maybe some of those questionable charges that I had, and if there was a better move that I didn't highlight or you would have done something differently, let me know. Because I would certainly love to learn and get a little better and get some perspective from some other people. So thank you guys so much.